Fantasy Sports Corp and Underdog Fantasy have teamed up to start your fantasy season off in the win column with Best Ball. What is Best Ball? It's quite simply the easiest way to win. No team management, no trades, no waivers. It's their biggest contest ever and it has only gotten bigger. You simply have to sit and win. You don't even have to set your lineup. Always get your best score every week. Just enter a contest, draft your team, and Underdog will do the rest. What could make this even better? How about free money, up to $100 using our exclusive promo code? Go online now and use the promo code InjuredList to double your deposit up to $100. You tell them Gingerbread sent you. Good girl.
Special shout out to today's episode to SeatGeek. We recently partnered with them to become a brand ambassador. What does that mean? Well, for you, it means you get a special discount when you make your first ticket purchase with SeatGeek. With my code InjuredListPod, you will get $20 off your first purchase with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is a ticket purchasing app that takes all the confusion out of buying tickets to your favorite sports, concert events, and more. They score each ticket on a scale of 1 to 10 to help you know if you're getting a good deal. Green is good, red is bad. My followers get $20 off their first ticket purchase using my code InjuredListPod. Click on the link in the show notes and browse for your favorite events. Your next big night ever is waiting, and they have the tickets.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the host of the Injured List podcast, Brian Scott.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Injured List podcast. Your host, Brian Scott, and another great episode for you this evening as we have another great guest, and we've had a long line of them, and it gets better and better, I think, with each guest that comes on the show. So today's guest, without further ado, is Krista Juerling, and Krista is a licensed counselor and has her own business and consulting and counseling practice called Speakstone, which we'll get into a little bit later. She's a coach, a personal trainer, a recreational athlete who's faced many challenges both on and off the playing field as well, like many of our other guests that we've had on. And I've been wanting to have a mental health expert on the show to talk about injuries and how we get around them and deal with them from a psychological point of view. So this is like the perfect guest. I've been waiting to have someone like her on. So let's get her up to the stage. Krista.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. I love that you highlighted recreational athlete. That was amazing because I've definitely fit that. So I love that.
I'm right there with you.
Yes.
Some would even say that those days are long behind me, and I would probably agree with them.
Yes, I love that.
So tell us a little bit about your background and your credentials, which are many, but well earned and used today in your practice. So, a little bit of history, where you're from and where you got your education and what you're currently up to.
Yeah, so I'm in Colorado now. I'm from Colorado, but I had moved away to New Mexico for some time. So I love both states. I'm definitely a heart torn between the two. But so I'm a licensed professional counselor candidate, so long, here in Colorado. And then I'm a licensed mental health counselor in New Mexico. They're all different names, you know. So I offer counseling in Colorado and New Mexico right now. And then I offer like mental performance coaching, and I do that globally, really. And I got into counseling. I was a strength coach, personal trainer before, and I was working with a variety of different athletes. And I was working alongside other just really phenomenal coaches that that were training very elite athletes, and it was so awesome. I loved it. I ended up going to grad school to get my master's in exercise science and coaching. And halfway through that, I was like, I don't know. I don't know if this is what gets me up in the morning. And I love exercise science, but I love the psychology piece a little bit more, the mental health piece more. And I switched halfway through and haven't looked back. So I'm very grateful for my time as a coach, but I'm really excited to be doing what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Awesome. And I'm assuming, given your background with the strength and conditioning coaching and all that stuff, that majority, if not the focus of your practice, is around athletics and athletic performance and athletes.
Yeah. I primarily serve athletes, coaches, affiliated personnel. So could be, athletic trainers, personal trainers, physical therapists, people kind of in the space of athletics, right? And then I have some general population of recreational athletes like myself, because I think even recreationally, right, there is a lot of people that seek out athletics in adulthood that aren't professional or elite like myself. They still want to perform well, right? And so I do still work with them too.
And you not only talk the talk, you walk the walk. You perform and practice Brazilian jiu-jitsu currently, which is pretty cool. And note taken, not to mess with you. Now, one thing that we've been lacking on the show has been a guest to really get into the mental side of dealing with sports injuries. And so that's why I really wanted to have you on to give us a very unique perspective in how athletes have to jump over those mental hurdles to get back on the field of play, not just after an injury, but also how they deal with it from a mental standpoint at the time of the injury, working through their rehab and recovery process. So no better person to have on the show than yourself. Take us through that whole process. Let's go back to when an athlete who perhaps has never had to deal with some type of injury from sport, maybe some minor aches and pains or bumps and bruises, now finds themselves at a point where they're dealing with a significant injury where they may now have to lose some time, may even potentially have to have surgery, which could threaten their season, potentially career. Where do you come in? And at that point, what is the focus? What are some techniques? I mean, let's get into it because a lot of people have questions and this is not my forte.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. So not to backpedal, but one thing that I kind of miss, when I was a coach, my favorite part about working with my athletes was hearing their story, right? Hearing what they were going through, the struggles they were having in parenting or in their relationships or, coming back from pregnancy postpartum or, coming back from injury. Right. And so that really motivated me. And so when you say where do we start? That's such a great question because that is so individual, right? So if you have an athlete that hasn't really experienced, like you're saying, injury, setback, I'm automatically going to be kind of looking to just their mental status, in the moment, right? How are we operating right now? There's so many working parts that go into mental health. So when we consider an isolated event like a torn ACL, you kind of have to question more than just how do you feel right now? Because you have to go a little bit deeper. So you can start with how are you feeling right now? Where are we at? Kind of implementing some general assessments like a depression screening or anxiety screening, things like that. But then really considering other things, right? An injury setback for someone that's on a pretty set salary and they know they're going to come back in a few games, or they know even if they're out, they'll recover and they'll come back. might be a different experience than someone that isn't really on a set salary, right? And they're fighting for each game or each time of play. And so I think really kind of getting that holistic first, like picture of what's really going on right now and like honing in on how you're doing right now, and then going bigger of like the holistic would be kind of where I would start personally, like, getting that understanding of potential risks for them in their mental health, and that really starts with really just like a psychosocial assessment, right? Taking like a history, just getting to know them as a person, outside of just their performance.
Yeah, and I would think, so as a former athletic trainer, we often found ourselves, or the training room itself actually became almost like that kind of therapy room, therapy session, right? Like they would come in and see us right after getting hurt. A lot of times it wasn't even to get treated. Sometimes it was just to hang out and kind of get away from court or the field where they felt maybe embarrassed or depressed because they were out there watching but knew they couldn't participate. And sometimes the training room was a good escape for them. So I'm sure that you've seen that as well. And that's, from my point of view, that's usually where it started, right? Maybe this feeling of like, I'm letting myself and my team down. There's nothing I can do. It's kind of hopeless at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get involved with them, are these assessments that you do just kind of like sit down, having a discussion one-on-one? Is it more like, hey, fill out this form for me? Or do you try to keep it more casual, kind of more laid back like you would in like a regular therapy session kind of thing? Or
yeah. So, I mean, again, like if we're talking counseling, like I can only really work in the states that I'm licensed, right? Sure. But with any athlete that come into, my office for counseling or, virtual, whatever, I'm kind of laid back already. Like I'm not really someone that's like, okay, here are all my fancy forms. And, I definitely believe in, the right forms need to be signed and all the things. But, I think that's a personal preference. Some people like to send the assessments to the clients before. But I kind of like seeing if the client wants to fill it out with me. I think you risk a few things, like, on some of the assessments, they might not want to answer a question with you around, honestly. And so you kind of run that risk when you're in person. And it might happen again too, though, if they're filling it out on their own. And for me, just really establishing that rapport, like that relationship with my client, is the most important thing, first and foremost, to let them know that I'm not here to judge them. I'm not here to just, there's a very big difference between coaching and counseling, right? And so I'm really providing the space for them to process the things that maybe they don't really want to say out loud other places, or maybe they haven't really acknowledged before. And that could be really terrifying, right? I specialize in PTSD and depression, trauma. And when you get someone that is like ready, they're not maybe like, ready, but they're like, hey, I need to maybe address some of this stuff going on and maybe some of the stuff in the past. If I'm like sitting there like the expert and like, like, come to me for all your answers. Like, I don't think it's going to go very far, I think, so I definitely try to keep it pretty personal or personable and laid back, because I know that for me, I wouldn't want to go to a counselor if they're like, there's a joke between a friend of mine, just kind of like, it's great when people write books. It gets real awkward when we try to like force books on our clients, so I would never want to be like that or something. So
no, I get that. It makes sense. You don't want to just be reciting from a textbook and look like that stereotypical professor from the TV or the therapist who's on the,
right. It's like there's a time and a place, right? Like I read all that stuff. Like I'm the nerd that's like, yes, send me your podcasts and send me your books and like, but when we're talking like someone that is like in a state of distress or dysregulation, like that's not really the time to be like, here's all my whatever. So when we do assessments, I like to do them with them. I definitely give them the option. Hey, do you want to fill this out before? Or would you rather wait until we're meeting? And then I kind of move on from that, because assessments, I had a professor say this in class one time, and it just stuck with me. And he was saying, assessments are phenomenal and they're great tools to track symptoms and all these things, but they're descriptive. They're not always really prescriptive. So I don't really, again, I like to take it as a piece of the puzzle. And so really kind of move on from there and see what's really going on. What are some outside factors that are influencing the gravity of this current situation? And how can we go from there?
And so in your initial evaluation, what's the more common things you see, the common trends and behaviors or moods or whatnot that you see athletes in when they're first dealing with that initial shock of the injury and then getting their diagnosis and knowing like, okay, here's what we need to do next? What do you typically see?
Yeah, I think when I have an athlete that's come to me like to deal with like post-injury, right? Or in the healing process, I think what I see a lot is like fear, right? A lot of anxious symptoms of like, what happens, what if I don't get better? What if someone else takes my spot and they're better than me? Sometimes that happens, right? You are off, someone comes on and coach likes them better, or they're performing.
And that might be a fear that they've had all along kind of brewing, yes. And then the injury just takes it to another level.
Yes. Yeah. So a lot of that, I specialize in brain spotting. So I'm always looking for that limbic system.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. You might as well, let's talk about that.
Let's go into that. Okay. Yeah. I'm always looking for those limbic system cues that are like telling me like the emotions, right? The emotion brain. Because like, I don't know how nerdy you want me to go, Brian, but,
when I hear the word brain spotting, and probably a lot of my listeners are thinking the same thing, I almost kind of equate it to like that whole grounding and earthing thing where you basically go barefoot and try to reconnect and balance out your system. Is brain spotting kind of something similar?
It's different, but I love that. I would live barefoot if it was socially acceptable. So, I am never wearing shoes. So I mean, I'm all for that stuff, but with brain spotting,
there's no correlation between grounding and brain spotting. They're two completely different.
It's probably, I don't know enough about grounding to really talk about that, but it's probably similar in the sense that you're probably trying to tap into that limbic system is what it sounds like with grounding. Someone else that specializes in that, like you have another episode already, should come on and talk to both of us about that.
The only reason I brought it up is I saw there's a Netflix special about it. I haven't even watched it yet.
Oh, it's amazing. Yes, that's so awesome. Yeah, no, so like with brain spotting, we're so okay. We know that trauma and life in general gets stored in the body, right? Happy times, happy memories, positive emotions, and also really scary and terrifying events get stored in the body. And brain spotting kind of is a great way to tap into that, right? So we are using our eyes to access that midbrain, that limbic system, to do all the processing. So it is if you know Bessel van der Kolk or something, he has like a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. Okay. So he talks a lot about like top down healing and then like bottom up healing, and brain spotting would be like a bottom up because we're tapping into the emotions, right? So we know that really with brain spotting, what we're doing is we're locating maybe a spot that you feel activated or grounded. There's a couple ways to do this. So, but we'll go with activated. Like you tore your ACL, you planted wrong, and now every time you think of it, it's not great, right? You're feeling yuck.
You run that through your mind all
Mhm.
the time.
Right.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. I tore my ACL.
Oh, nice. Me too.
Yeah.
I use it. Right.
So,
You're like,
I mean, that fear of the inventing, or not reinventing, but rehearsing and redoing that same movement that caused the injury. You're always kind of subconsciously like, you go back to that moment.
Right. So logically, you might be able to tell yourself, oh, well, I know that if I just don't like plant like that and kick weird or whatever, then I'll be fine. Right. But somatically, like your body is still pretty activated from that event. So what I see is athletes that are in that healing process, right? They're getting cleared by athletic trainers or their physical therapists, their orthos, to get back out there and, slowly or fully cleared, but they're stepping on the field or the court, whatever, the ring, and they're like, I know I'm okay, but I'm freezing every time I get in a similar situation, right? So that is where with Brainspotting, we're tapping into that freeze. So we're locating a spot maybe that you're feeling that freeze, maybe, people feel it all over their bodies. Like,
Right.
Your hand could go numb, your head hurts, whatever. And then we're processing there and we're letting your brain do what it needs to. And you are the expert, not me. I'm holding the drawer open on the filing cabinet, but you're the one going in and like pulling whatever files. Your brain
I get it. Makes total sense. I totally get what you're saying. In fact, now that I think about it, I think would you call it a brain spotting moment? Coming back from my ACL.
Yeah.
Like I could recall, like I would almost get like this sudden rush of anxiety, or almost like I could feel my stomach turn.
Yeah.
Whenever I was going to repeat that movement or that thing that I tore my ACL on.
Right.
9 months before. And I was like, whoa, what was that?
Right.
And then now that you talk about this, and that's exactly what I was doing. I was going back to my brain, to that moment, and feeling that physical manifestation of that emotional connection to that moment in time when I tore my knee up. So I get it. Yeah.
Right. So it's like when we, because I am, I do mental performance coaching too, right? And I use brain spotting in my coaching very, differently, obviously, for obvious reasons like licensure reasons and everything. But, if we're doing coaching, it's going to look a little different. We're going to say more here now, not go so much, but it, I end up also adding in mental skills and things like that with coaching where, it's funny because I get a lot of coaches reach out to me and they're like, I have an athlete that they know all of the skills. They have all of the mental skills, but they can't get past their fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Like something is blocking them, And so that is why I love Brainspotting, because we can go in and give like your subconscious is coming to the conscious, right? We're connecting it and giving that room to process, but then also to release, right? So you get a client come in and they're like, it's like makes me want to throw up every time I think about, going back out there or whatever. Yeah. And I'm like an 8 out of 10 on I'm about to barf, right? Right. So with the Brainspotting at the end, we're going to check back in on that 8 out of 10, and they might be like a 4 or 5, and the cool thing is the research that is there is showing that 4 or 5 is staying a 4 and 5, right? We're really processing. We're not just feeling better in this 50 minutes and then it's, back on Tuesday. We're really, really processing. So when we talk about the counseling side, when it is an injury, but it's accompanied by many other factors and we're digging deeper because we can on the counseling piece, sometimes that 8 out of 10 goes to like a 7. And then we go 7, come back in and you're like a 6, 7. And then we get that down to like a 4 or 5. So it can be, when it's more complex, it can take a little bit longer.
Sure.
When it's kind of like, oh yeah, it can kind of go faster.
So are
it
there
just really
specific
depends.
techniques or things or drills or exercises that you do or teach your athletes to basically help them overcome this? Like, what are some of the methods that you use?
Yeah. So the brain spotting is something we do together. I use like either, there's various ways to do it. We can use a pointer, or we can use just gaze spotting would be one where someone is gazing, right? They're just looking off. But say you're talking to me about something and I notice you're looking in a direction, and I might say, hey, I'm noticing you're looking over here. What do you notice when, so with the brain spotting, we kind of do it in office. Depending on the person, if you want to kind of see how you're feeling with eyes closed or eyes open on your own, go for it. But otherwise, on the mental performance skills, I do a lot of breath work. So there is a guy in Albuquerque. His name's Doc Shandon, and he does like kind of a visualization, breath, and speaking methodology, and I'll implement his stuff off and on. And I will have clients do that every day, right? It's like a meditation, right? So when we start talking about mindfulness and meditation, we're kind of talking that top down, where we're using our prefrontal cortex to regulate our limbic system, right? So we're able to kind of work on controlling and things like that, and getting to that meditated state. So once we've done a lot of clearing out and things like that, I will then add in skills, and we'll go a lot of, mindfulness, breath work. Breath work is huge, which can also be a bottom up thing too. But yeah. So a lot of skills like that. So
does it involve a lot of like visualization as well while you're doing the breath work, or can you incorporate that as well?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I don't quote me on this one. I should know this for a podcast, but I think it's the alpha waves, where when you're using visualization and breath and language, like speaking, that you're kind of engaging that flow state. I think it might be the alpha waves. I'm not a neuroscientist, okay?
We can always reference that later.
Yes.
And I'll put a link or something.
For sure. Yes, something like that. So visualization is huge. I am a big proponent, but because I also am always looking for that limbic system, I'm always having people try to tap in. So say, we'll just do jujitsu. If I was my own client, if I'm at practice, I might, if I'm training for a competition coming up, I might be challenging myself to notice times within a match, right? So I try to minimize having my clients like review the tape while they're performing, because I notice that happens a lot with a lot of high performers. They want to they mess up, and then they immediately go to trying to figure out how to fix it in the moment. But in a lot of sports, you don't have time to do that, especially combat sports. It's like, you messed up, move on. We will talk about it later, because if you sit here and think about it, you're going to get knocked out,
You'll be on your back and you'll be tapping.
Yes, game over. Like, I see a guillotine choke in your future, my friend. So, so it kind of depends on, football, right? There's a little bit of downtime. You can, talk about what happened in that possession, move on. But I try to help my clients not review the tape, but in training, if we are training, there would be 1 5-minute increment that I would challenge the client to notice, what do they smell? What do they, hear? What do they feel? What do they, and then, noticing oh shoot, I stuck my arm out or something. And then, I wouldn't do that too much as a practice because I don't want them to get in that habit, but it is good to also train some awareness at the same time. So a lot of the work that I do that would be set an intention for your training, do some breath work, visualization around that before, and then working on in the moment. I'm sure someone already thought of this, but I use like the term foundational or grounding truths.
Okay.
So if you do get choked out, right? We're at practice, you get choked out, whatever, you tap, it's over, you move on, right? If you are dysregulated, if you're pissed off, you're like, F that guy,
Yeah.
you're over it. You need to find a grounding, neutral truth that's going to bring you back to baseline.
Okay.
And then afterwards you can review the tape. So that's kind of more so what I do. It would be like the before mindfulness, visualization, breath work, setting an intention, during getting that foundational truth, and then after, reviewing the tape.
Gotcha.
So kind of things like that. Yeah.
I get it. Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to be harping on it and reviewing it right away. You want to let some time go by where you can calm your nerves, get your senses about you, your wits about you, and then come back later and say, okay, here's what I need to focus on. Here's what I did wrong. Here's what I need to improve or change.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I get it. So this is cool stuff. I mean, and this stuff can be applied and used throughout the process of getting injured, recovering, and then coming back to play. So this is stuff that can be implemented throughout that entire sequence and phase of recovery and injury and stuff. So these are some really powerful tools that a lot of athletes, unfortunately, do not have access to because, depending on where they are, whether, location-wise, what resources they have available to them, what organizations they play with or for. This is not stuff that we see every day. I mean, I can tell you in my days at the Division III level, did not have that. I can tell you my short time in minor league baseball, I don't recall ever seeing that. Although I know the players had access to sports psychology professionals, they were not really part of the staff or part of the team, so to speak. Right. But I do know that nowadays, especially in the NFL, there are several organizations that have brought on sports psychologists, counseling experts like yourself, who do this type of work on the regular and are constantly working with players, not who are just injured, but also healthy, to basically help them perform better, keep their mind focused, and not let a lot of distractions get in. So it's really fascinating to me to hear this from the injury point of view, because I said, it's an area that I'm not an expert in by any means. I don't have a lot of experience in dealing with it. All I can tell you from my point of view is that as athletic trainers, as healthcare professionals, especially if you're on the sidelines or in the training room or the locker room, you often see these athletes that are in need of some type of psychological help and are just begging for it and come looking and searching for that help, and they can't find it, unfortunately. So this is really important stuff.
Yeah, I think we're like on the wave of athletes being able to just talk about it and being able to say, hey, guess what? I'm a human too. And I'm not always so happy, living the dream, right? And to touch on that too, sports psychologists are phenomenal, and they have skills that, I don't even have. And they are amazing. And I think that it's awesome to see a lot of teams taking on sports psychs, because we need that out there. Yep. And I hope to see more teams taking on, sport mental health counselors, right? Because although we overlap in a lot of ways, there's a lot of ways that we are different too. And we need both, we need it both. We need a place for someone to really focus on and hone in on performance struggles and concerns. And we need a place for the athlete to be a human and talk about things that have happened in their past. I know that mental health has historically been underreported in the athlete population, and and I think too, coming back to that initial question you asked me, like, what do I see? It is that fear of, if I talk about this, is it going to get worse? If I acknowledge this, am I going to be as good of an athlete? Am I, going to be done? Like, there's fear, like it's, so I'm glad that we're starting to create this space where it doesn't have to be the end of your story to like talk to a counselor, it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a real and you mentioned fear, and I'm glad you actually came back to that, because I was going to ask you to kind of elaborate a little bit more on that, but also on some other things that you see that are very common for athletes who are injured. Fear is certainly probably one of the foremost and frontmost things that athletes experience. Fear of the unknown about the severity of their injury, the magnitude of that injury, and how it may affect their career going forward.
Yeah.
What is probably the next most common thing you see in athletes who are injured at any point in the injury process? Is there another thing that kind of jumps out you?
I think it depends on the age, right?
Okay.
If we're talking like, I think, younger athletes probably are more so like the fear for sure, but how that presents looks a little different. Like, I think we're starting to deal with some depression, right? Am I letting my family down? Am I letting the team down? Which I think that's across all ages, really. I just think it's a different style, I guess, if that makes sense. And so probably those depressive symptoms are starting to show for me, like, because I do specialize in PTSD, I'm always looking for the step before, right? Which would be some other kind of diagnoses, like acute stress, or, things that are kind of showing like, loss of interest in things that made them happy, sleeping more or less, kind of just all those typical things. How's their appetite? Are they isolating themselves a lot? That happens. I see that a lot with injury. Just a lot of kind of those depressive symptoms coming out of like, I can't go to practice, or if I go to practice, I just sit there and sucks, or, just different things start to kind of come up. But I would say we see a lot of like fear. So that can come off as like anxiousness, really. And then kind of the depressiveness with it, like depressive symptoms kind of accompanying it, really.
Yeah, I think that's a huge one as well. I see that quite a bit. Even now, in my role as a PA, I see that a lot in the office. You get the young, especially in the younger athletes. It can be very traumatic for them.
Yeah.
Maybe some of them have never experienced any type of traumatic event like this.
Right.
At a young age, what do you, a lot of times you'll be shielded from things regarding health.
Yes.
And bad, outcomes with health, like in family members and friends and stuff. So to experience then all of a sudden this thing that happens to you can be quite shocking and a lot to take in. So what are some of the mechanisms that you help your athletes how do you coach them through getting through that stuff?
Yeah. So a lot of awareness, right? So if we're talking about a young athlete, right, that's a system. I can't just work with the young athlete. That's got to be a family system approach too. So, that's always tricky. Sometimes families are on board, and sometimes they're like, just get better and we'll see you later,
Right.
So it's kind of depends on the age, like family system, if they're younger, and then kind of individual, but also leaning into support. So again, we can utilize Brainspotting. We can utilize some like talk therapy techniques kind of stuff. And then just kind of some, I don't love to go too solution focused right away, because I think, again, I'm always looking, I'm like the scab picker, Brian. I'm like, what's underneath that though? Let's dig deeper,
Yeah, sometimes you have to.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm always kind of looking deeper. So just kind of diving behind some athletes. So if you're coming into my office, I'm always wondering where in your life, where else have you gone through something, or where, like you're saying, if they're younger, they've been sheltered, they've been shielded from a lot of this stuff, that's a little bit of a different approach, because it's like, so let's understand why this feels so big compared to another person that's like, like, they're kind of like, oh yeah, just another elbow, whatever, the injuries that I've been hearing.
Oh, my cousin broke his wrist 7 times.
Right? It's like, whatever. This is only my 4th break, like, so, or even like, even in life trauma, right? Like you see like people come in with different kind of coping mechanisms based off of the life that they've lived, right? We don't just like cope from like huge traumatic events, right? We're constantly learning how to like go through life and in the way that's going to keep us regulated, feeling safe, feeling, okay in the world. And a lot of the time athletes are coming into my door because those coping mechanisms aren't working anymore. And so it's not so much, I do get preventative clients that want to like, hey, I'd like to stay on top of this. I would say that's a little bit more the minority though, that not a lot of clients are like, hey, I want to go into the, like, I'm fine, like, hey, I'm noticing this is gonna be a hard season for me, so I want to get ahead of the game. I think a lot of people are coming in, right? A lot of people are, right? They're coming in because they're like, my coping mechanisms aren't working. So we kind of look at like where was the dysfunction or the malfunction in the coping mechanisms? What were you doing before? Why aren't they working? Why did they serve you in the past, right? Because they do, right? They serve us for some reason. And then why aren't they working now? And then how can we kind of work to add in different skills and, whether that's mindfulness, maybe that's social engagement, maybe that's, I think that's where the individuality comes, is with the client and their needs. Yeah,
it's great stuff. Man, I feel like we could sit here all day and talk about this, because I think I have more questions than the people listening, but that's just because I'm
questions too.
That's just like I said though, this because I'm around it and I don't know a lot about it. I'm around this all the time. Like, I deal with the injured young youth and professional and elite level, and I mean it's hard. It's a hard thing to kind of wrap into a nicely fit package and deliver it to the client and be like, there you go. Here's all you need to do is right here. But no, it doesn't work like that.
It doesn't.
It's multifaceted. There's a lot of moving pieces. You got the physical affecting the mental, vice versa. So you're trying to attack from one end, and I'm working on the other side trying to help them, and they've got all these things they've got to work on. And man, I've been through it, and I'm sure you have too, even as a recreational athlete, where you've dealt with an injury and had to come back. You mentioned your ACL injury as well as mine. So I think we all kind of get it a little bit, but I don't think we really kind of deeply understand just how important it is to get a handle on right from the get-go. Because what you don't want to happen, and this is what I see very often, and this is kind of bringing me to my last kind of big question here, is for those athletes that you do see at that point where they have basically hit rock bottom, where maybe they've been cleared or they're nearing being cleared to return from a major injury, and they show up in your office and they're like, Krista, I just can't do it. Like, I've been cleared. It's been a year since my surgery. I'm, ready to go back, but I just find myself hesitant, unsure, not quite feeling like I'm ready, even though physically I feel good. How do you deal with that? I feel like that's probably got to be one of the more difficult type of coaching, counseling stuff you do.
Yeah, those are my favorite clients. I love those clients. I'm like, let's go. It's so hard, right? Because you're like that, even when you were saying that, I'm like, oh, like my heartstrings, they're just being pulled, On the coaching side, I'm a little limited, right? We can still work together, but I always, I'm going to say it again, always make sure if we're doing mental performance coaching that I have looked up some mental health supports in your area, because especially if we're doing brain spotting and something comes up like, oh yeah, I'm just remembering this thing and now this car accident that was, or this, where now it's like, okay, well, this is starting to turn counseling. I'm going to definitely want to have that referral on hand to get them that support. So with the coaching, when clients are coming to me like that, I already have my sensors up, like, this is probably counseling. We're probably going to need to get you a mental health support. I can still work with you coaching, or, it really depends on the client, how they want to, if they say, thank you, yes, I will call these counselors. Great meeting you. See you later. I'm happy I did my job. I got them the support they need. If they're like, yeah, I still want to work performance while I'm talking to this counselor, great, we can do that too. On the counseling side though, I'm like, come on in, let's go. Because that to me is where you have someone that is like, okay, my coping strategies are not working. Like, I have tried it all. I've done it all.
Mhm.
I should be fine and I'm not. And I love that, because that is so raw. When someone can come to you and they're like, I'm rock bottom, man,
Yeah.
that's when we can like work,
Yeah.
So it doesn't scare me. I'm like, let's go. I get amped. I'm like, here we go, because it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be pretty. And I think that's why, I'm not everybody's kind of counselor either, because,
Right.
I don't do a bunch of like kumbaya, and which I wish I was sometimes a little softer, which, because I learned so much from so many of my colleagues that just, I'm
Sure.
like, oh, you're just wonderful. But, I think coming from the coach and athletic side, I'm like, let's go there. Like, I'm
Like,
not
it's time to
scared.
dig in our heels. Let's get to it. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
let's do it. Like,
I kind of take a similar approach in dealing
yeah,
with my injured patients. I kind of revel in like the really bad orthopedic trauma stuff. I don't know why,
yeah,
but like, because that's when people are really at their most desperate
right.
and vulnerable, and they're really like, they are at the bottom,
Yes.
probably as low as they've ever been, and it's
Yeah.
time to like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna build this back up, and we're gonna start at zero, and we're gonna do it together. So I totally get what you're saying, and I revel in those challenges too, and I'm
Yeah.
sure, like you said, you find that to
Right.
be like
Right.
the ideal
And
client.
yes, for sure, right? Because you're like, here we go. Like, I'm not scared. Like, I'll go to that dark place with you. Like, you're in
Yeah.
a pit. I'm coming on down, man. Like, we're gonna climb up together. Like, I'm not gonna climb for you.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do the work for you. You're gonna have to do it yourself, but I'll be right next to you the whole way through. And that's why I love when you say like that athlete that's like, oh my gosh, I can't. Like, I'm freaking out.
Yeah.
This is it. Or, I mean, working with athletes experiencing, all kinds of trauma, and they're like, how do I go back and play for a different coach when they have trauma from an old coach? Like, let's go. I'm not, I'm ready. So if
Yeah.
they're ready, I'm ready,
Awesome.
So I think for me, again, as far as like how we go about treating that, that's where it gets a little too individual to kind of go into
We could probably
brainstorming.
spend a whole nother episode just talking about
Yes,
that.
for sure. Because also, it just depends, right?
Yeah.
I'll say that a million times. It just kind of
Yeah.
depends on,
It's very individualized. It really
right?
has to kind of be
Mhm.
tailored to the individual.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. But
but
I love those athletes.
now, so the big difference though in my field and in your field is where I can pretty much say, okay, so here's your injury at 12 to 18 months. You're fully recovered. We've checked all the scans. We've done all our exams. I've got nothing left to offer you. Conversely, you're like, hey, listen, we're just hitting the peak. Now you want to
Yeah.
stay there. We've got some more work to do. So
Yeah.
your kind of stuff doesn't really ever have a definite or finite end. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of what you're doing with your athletes carries over and just
Yeah.
continues to some degree,
Yeah.
right? I mean, these are
Right.
sometimes clients and athletes that you potentially could be working with for the entire length of their career, whereas I might only see them for a brief moment or a
Right.
period of time.
Right.
But this mental stuff and this counseling, coaching, and
Mhm.
this stuff can certainly be helpful throughout not just their injury, but the remainder of their career moving forward. So I think that's an
Right.
important keynote thing that people should take away from this
For sure.
episode. If they don't really understand some of the science behind it or some of the techniques, at least take that away, right? Like
Yeah.
you might need help not just at the beginning. You might not need help not only through that process, but moving forward and moving on as well.
And like, a year from now, right? Like I have clients that leave and go out and I'm like happy. It's always that weird moment for clients for some reason when they're like, so I think I'm doing good. Like they're breaking up with me or
Like,
something.
I don't know how to tell you this, but I
Yes,
don't think I
yeah.
need you anymore. And you're
I'm
kind of
like,
like, well, great. Then my
that's
job is
phenomenal.
done.
Yes.
Success, yeah.
Right. I'm like, that was always the goal, was
Right,
to like,
yeah, we've attained our goal. Like this is a
yes,
good.
yeah. Yeah. So then, and then life happens and maybe they start experiencing something and it's triggering that trauma from the past. And so then they come on back in and we work on that and then I send them on out. It's really just kind of, and I think too, the sport, right? It depends on the sport. Like, are you in
Absolutely.
season? Are you off season? Are you in camp? Are you off camp? Like really kind of, so I definitely have a open door and understanding. I'm not very rigid, but like we have to meet for 6 weeks at this time. I'm kind of like
Right.
we'll figure it out.
Yeah, hit me up when you need me. I'm always here.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere.
Awesome. Well, this has been great. I know we're kind of running low on time here. I just want to kind of summarize it up, but I don't think I can because, like I said, there's still so much we haven't covered, so much more to talk about, so much more that I don't even know. We can keep you here for several episodes running, but we got to move on. So,
Yes.
but if people want to learn more about this type of treatments and counseling and coaching sessions and things that they can, maybe look for or educate themselves on, or where to go for help, I will have all of Krista's information in the show notes. She is the owner of her own company, Speakstone Counseling and Consulting, which I have a little screenshot here.
Oh, nice.
And that's it. Yeah, that's your webpage there, the header. Check out her website and look for her on LinkedIn and some of her other social media handles, which I will have available. In closing, Krista, is there anything else that you want maybe to share that you think is important that maybe we didn't touch on?
It depends. That's all I'll say. It depends. No, I think you're right. There's just so much, and I mean, so much that I'm learning, and that I hope that I'll learn for the rest of my life. I love to learn and love to keep growing as a counselor and as a coach to see how I can serve my athletes better and coaches, right, and affiliated personnel. And I don't think we'll ever stop needing to learn. So you're going to have a lot of podcast episodes, I'm sure.
Our professions won't let us stop learning. So the learning never stops.
Yeah.
But awesome. So I will say one thing in closing. I will say that, don't ask me why. I get all the questions when I do my fantasy football updates and all this other stuff. I get, why isn't he back yet? And I'm like, yeah, it's, he's probably ready physically. I'm like, don't forget, there's a big mental component to all this. I don't know. I can't speak to that. Nobody might know. I mean, we can guess.
You can just start saying, well, it depends.
That's what I do. I say it depends. I say maybe he's just not ready.
Right. It depends.
Leave it at that. Yeah.
There's a lot of things that we
That's right. That's right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining the episode today, and special thank you to Krista Juerling for. Special thanks to Krista Juerling for jumping on the podcast episode with us here today. Once again, if you want to see Krista's information, I'll have it all in the show notes. Speakstone Counseling and Consulting owner, counselor extraordinaire, Krista Juerling. Thanks, Krista, for joining us on the podcast. Appreciate having you.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Injured List Podcast with your host, Brian Scott, your go-to resource for all sport injury-related topics. For show notes and other resources, visit theinjuredlist.com.